South Korea, July 5th, 1950. The sun rises over a quiet ridge near the small town of Osan. Below, a narrow road cuts through open fields. At first, it looks peaceful, but behind the hills, 540 American soldiers wait, nervous and silent. Their uniforms are soaked with sweat. Some are still boys, 18, maybe 19 years old. Most have never seen combat. They dig into shallow foxholes, clutching old rifles and worn-out gear from World War II. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith, has given them one mission: stop the North Korean army. No tanks, no air support, just courage and a few artillery guns. Then, off in the distance, they hear it. A low rumble, metal tracks on dirt, the sound of tanks, and suddenly they appear. 33 Soviet-made T-34ES rolling straight toward them. Behind the tanks, thousands of enemy soldiers march with machine guns and mortars. This is the first American battle of the Korean War, and it's about to become a disaster. Before we dive into the full story of this forgotten mission, take a moment to like this video if you're interested in hidden military history. And if you want more true stories like this from wars, black ops, and missions that went wrong, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now let's go back. Let's look at how a small group of under-equipped soldiers became the first to face North Korea, and how they were left to stand alone against an army. The war that no one expected, the army that wasn't ready. After World War II ended in 1945, the United States thought it could finally relax. Nazi Germany was gone. Japan had surrendered. America had nuclear weapons, a strong economy, and global power. But peace didn't last. In Asia, a new crisis was building, one most Americans didn't understand and few leaders truly prepared for. Korea had been a Japanese colony during the war. After Japan's defeat, the country was split in two. The Soviets took control of the North, and the Americans took control of the South. It was meant to be temporary, but by 1950, Korea had become a Cold War battlefield. In the North, communist leader Kim Il-sung, backed by the Soviet Union and later China, was building a powerful army. In the South, President Syngman Rhee was trying to hold his new country together with limited support and a weak military. Both sides claimed to rule all of Korea, and both were getting ready for war. On June 25, 1950, without warning, 90,000 North Korean soldiers crossed the 38th parallel and invaded the South. They used Soviet tanks, trucks, and training. The attack was fast and brutal. In just 3 days, they captured Seoul, the capital of South Korea. South Korean troops were retreating. Civilians were fleeing in panic. America and the United Nations were shocked. President Harry Truman made a quick decision. The United States would go to war. The goal was to stop the spread of communism and defend South Korea. But there was a problem. After World War II, the U.S. military had been cut down. Troops were scattered across the world. Many soldiers had old weapons, little training, and no combat experience. In Japan, General Douglas MacArthur was in charge of U.S. forces. He needed to act fast. So he sent the closest available unit, the 24th Infantry Division, to Korea. From that group, he created a small team to be the first to fight. Their job was not to win, just slow down the North Koreans until more American forces could arrive. That team was called Task Force Smith. They were young, they were outnumbered, and they were sent into a war no one was ready for. Next, we'll look at how Task Force Smith was formed and how these men were thrown into one of the most desperate missions in modern American history. Japan, early July 1950. The phone rings, orders are rushed in. General Douglas MacArthur has made his choice. He needs a unit to go to Korea now. Not next week, not tomorrow, now. The 24th Infantry Division is based in Japan. It's under-strength, under-equipped, and mostly made up of occupation troops. But it's the only unit close enough to respond. From this division, a small force is chosen for the job. It's given to Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bradford Smith, a 34-year-old West Point graduate with no combat experience. His mission: get in, hold the line, and slow the enemy down. Lieutenant Colonel Smith gathers two companies, Companies B and C of the 21st Infantry Regiment, totaling about 540 soldiers. Most of them are between 18 and 22 years old. Some had been trained for combat, Others had been cooks, drivers, or clerks the week before. Their weapons were leftovers from World War II, M1 rifles and light machine guns, two 75 recoilless rifles, a few bazookas, old ones, the kind that could barely dent a tank, six 105 howitzers from an artillery battery. That was it. No tanks, no anti-tank mines, no air support. Worse, many of the radio ammunition was limited, and most soldiers had never fired their weapons in a real fight. Still, their orders were clear. Fly to South Korea, dig in near the town of Osan, and block the road south. The hope was simple. If American troops stood in the way, the North Koreans might hesitate. They won't fight us. Many American leaders believed the North Koreans would back down once they saw U.S. soldiers. Some even said, the sight of an American uniform will stop them. That belief would soon prove deadly. Lieutenant Colin Smith and his men flew into South Korea on July 1st, just days after the war began. They traveled by train and truck to Osan, a small farming town about 30 miles from Seoul. There they dug trenches on a ridge overlooking the main highway. They were tired. The heat was unbearable. The ground was hard. And they knew almost nothing about the enemy they were about to face. Still, they followed orders. They set up their machine guns. They placed artillery on the hill behind them. And they waited. 5 days later, the tanks came, and everything fell apart. July 5th, 1950, 7 a.m. The air is thick with heat and tension. The men of Task Force Smith have been waiting on a low ridge just outside the town of Osan for hours. They barely slept the night before. Their trenches are shallow, their positions spread too thin. But they're ready, or as ready as 540 exhausted, undertrained soldiers can be. Then it happens. A spotter shouts from the ridge. In the distance down the highway, black shapes appear through the morning haze. Tanks. The sound follows. The grinding of steel tracks, the deep rumble of diesel engines. The North Korean T-34 tanks, Soviet-built monsters, are heading straight for them. Lieutenant Colonel Smith gives the order. The artillery opens fire, and shells rain down on the road. Dust explodes into the air. Some of the tanks slow down, but none stop. Then the infantry joins in. Rifle fire, machine guns, recoilless rifles, bazookas. One bazooka team fires a round at the lead tank. It hits and bounces off. The men stare in disbelief. These old weapons can't penetrate the heavy armor of the T-34s. Another team tries again. Same result. The tanks keep rolling. Some of the 105mm howitzers manage to destroy a few of the lead vehicles, but only because they're firing directly at them at close range. The rest of the tanks roll around the wrecks and keep coming. The ground begins to shake. Enemy infantry, thousands of them, start pouring in behind the tanks. Task Force Smith is now facing an entire regiment of North Korean troops, more than 5,000 men. At first, the Americans hold their ground. They're firing constantly, trying to keep the road blocked. Mortar teams work quickly. Machine gunners are overheating their barrels. Officers shout over the roar of gunfire. But it isn't enough. The enemy flanks both sides. Mortar shells rain down. North Korean soldiers move in closer, shooting from rice paddies, from ditches, from behind trees. American positions start to collapse. Some radio equipment fails. Units can't communicate. Ammunition starts to run low. Soldiers begin to fall back. Others panic. Some break and run. The officers try to regroup, but the lines are collapsing fast. By 11 a.m., it's clear. Task Force Smith is being overrun. Lieutenant Colin Smith gives the order. Withdraw. But this is no organized retreat. It's chaos. Some groups manage to slip away through the hills. Others get cut off and are surrounded. Wounded soldiers are left behind in the rush. Medics try to drag them, but it's too late. North Korean troops swarm through the battlefield. One howitzer team, surrounded, destroys their own gun before running. Others are captured. Some play dead in the grass and mud. Of the 540 men who started the battle, nearly one-third are killed, wounded, or captured. In just a few hours, the first American battle of the Korean War ends in disaster. Task Force Smith was never supposed to win. Its mission was to delay the enemy. But even that was based on a dangerous lie, that American presence alone would scare the North Koreans. Instead, the enemy came prepared, with tanks, artillery, and overwhelming numbers. Task Force Smith had no anti-tank weapons that worked, no backup, and no real support. They were thrown into battle too early, too lightly armed, and too alone. Some soldiers fought bravely, holding the line as long as they could. Others were paralyzed by fear, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what they were facing. It wasn't just a tactical mistake. It was a failure of planning, of intelligence, and of leadership at the highest levels. As night fell, the survivors regrouped to the south. Some were evacuated. Others joined new units. But the battle had already made its mark. Task Force Smith had delayed the North Koreans for only 7 hours. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it was enough to expose just how unready the U.S. military really was. Back in Washington and Tokyo, the message was clear. This would not be a quick war, and America was going to pay a high price for its peacetime comfort. The survivors of Task Force Smith stumbled south in silence. Many were wounded. Some were in shock. Others had lost friends, leaders, or entire squads. They had left behind fallen comrades, destroyed equipment, and the brutal truth, they had been sent to fail. Out of the 540 soldiers who entered the battle near Osan, 60 were killed, 21 were wounded, 82 were captured by the North Koreans. That's 163 casualties in just one day, more than 30% of the entire force. Worse, the mission had failed to stop or even slow the North Korean advance in any meaningful way. After defeating Task Force Smith, enemy forces kept moving south, fast. Within days, other American units were rushed into battle, also unprepared. One after another, they suffered heavy losses. The U.S. Army was learning a hard lesson. On the battlefield, belief and confidence mean nothing without preparation. News of the defeat hit military and government leaders like a punch in the gut. They had believed that America's reputation alone would make the enemy hesitate. But the North Koreans hadn't hesitated. They had attacked with force and confidence. Military leaders realized the truth. The U.S. Army, once the strongest in the world, had been cut too deeply after World War II. Troops were scattered, supplies were low, and many soldiers weren't trained for modern war. Task Force Smith became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong: poor planning, weak equipment, and dangerous overconfidence. A wake-up call. The defeat forced the U.S. military to act fast. New weapons were shipped to Korea. Better trained units were flown in. Soldiers were given modern anti-tank weapons, radios, and gear. Commanders began treating the war like a real, long-term conflict, not a quick police action. Task Force Smith had shown that the United States couldn't rely on past victories or reputation. It had to adapt, fast or lose the war. In time, many of the survivors would go on to serve in other battles. Some stayed in the war until the end. Others returned home, wounded in body and spirit. But what they did, standing alone in front of an invading army with no chance of victory, was not forgotten by those who followed them. In military training today, Task Force Smith is often studied as an example of what happens when leadership sends brave men into battle without the tools they need. Their mission failed, but their sacrifice forced the U.S. to face reality, and it may have saved thousands of lives in later battles. Section 6. Legacy and Memory, 400 words. Today, very few people know the name Task Force Smith. There are no blockbuster movies, no best-selling books, no famous monuments in Washington, D.C. But in military history, Task Force Smith stands as a warning, a symbol of what happens when leadership sends soldiers into battle without training, support, or a real plan. Their mission was based on hope. Hope that the enemy would be scared. Hope that a small force could stop a wave. But war doesn't care about hope. The Korean War would go on for 3 more years. Hundreds of thousands of people would die. Cities would be destroyed, families divided, and a new front in the Cold War would be drawn across the 38th parallel. But the first shots, the first American blood spilled, came from a small group of young soldiers standing alone on a ridge near Osan. But their defeat forced the U.S. to face the truth. And because of that, later American units were better armed, better trained, and better prepared. Their failure helped others survive. That matters. Today, military officers still study Task Force Smith at West Point and other academies. It's taught as a case in leadership, logistics, and readiness. Not because the men failed, but because the system around them failed first. Task Force Smith reminds us that it's not enough to have strength on paper. You need planning, equipment, training, and above all, respect for the lives you send into war. If you made it this far, thank you. These stories deserve to be remembered, even when they're painful or hard to hear. If you learned something today, or if you want more untold military stories like this one, please take a moment to like the video. It really helps us grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more true history, dark, raw, and real, just like Task Force Smith.